What's up, guys? It is February 11th, 2019. Had an open Q&A this week, so lots of good questions, of course, and we will dive right into it. First question I had was on Facebook, talking about the Brad Schoenfeld study, 45 sets per week per body part. The claims, do his claims become true at a certain level of assistance or no? And by assistance meaning, PED use. And well, while that would help with muscular recovery, certainly it's not necessarily going to translate over into CNS recovery all that much. So I mean, that variable is probably not that relevant, but just the study in general is just not really applicable to our population, because the actual workout is not, is not really like anything that we're going to do. And that's a problem that I find with a lot of the volume studies, a lot of the hypertrophy studies, is they'll use, the model of the actual study or the model of the workout they use is silly. It's like, it'll be something like a single leg extension and they do 30 sets or, whatever it is. And it's usually not very applicable to what we're actually doing in our own training. So that's where the issue lies for me in most of the studies, is that they're just very hard to apply because the context is just not there. So I would say no. It's not really a model that I'm going to use, and I can't think of, just from an anecdotal standpoint, I can't think of many people I would do 45 sets per week on a body part off the top of my head, especially not 45 working sets that meet the intensity threshold that we're looking for. Even if I split up the frequency between 2 or 3 workouts, I mean, that's still quite a bit. So no, probably I don't see a whole lot of merit in that. I know there are other studies out there too that have like the 30 set squat workout. I mean, there's a lot of them. There's one for bicep curls floating around too, and they're just all, and let's say, even if we could use them, how long could we use them before, something like just pure CNS fatigue set in? So, I mean, no, not a lot of contextual value to these, unfortunately. Okay. Next one asks about, let's see, what do you do for tracking volume per muscle group per week, or what methods do you use and look for yourself and clients, and what are your thoughts on weekly volume per muscle group, or how do you manage this? All right, well, personally, I pretty much know what I think my MRV is, or my maximum recoverable volume at this point. I kind of where I can train, and I try to progress my load, within that volume range. I can go up and down, or going down is obviously not difficult, but I can go up at least for short periods. It's just I can't go up for very long periods without overreaching very quickly, and I might purposely overreach at times. But in general, I kind of have an idea of where my threshold is, and that's something that you're really only going to learn with time for each person. I know there are models for MRV, for example, and there are like minimum effective volume, and I mean, those are okay, but there's just too much individuality between the groups, between trainees, and it's hard to really calculate that. I would normally probably start someone with, if I had let's say I had literally no idea of their volume parameters, and they had no idea because they hadn't, a lot of experience, I'd probably start them somewhere in the mid-range. I can do 10 to 15 working sets a week on a body part, maybe something in that range, and kind of reevaluate from there. I might, if they have the recovery ability, I might push a weak body part a little bit higher with, or take that total volume and split it up with a little bit more frequency. But it's probably somewhere in that range, unless I'm using, for whatever reason, like I'm using purely a low volume program and just focusing on progression. Maybe they have time restraints in their training or something, and I need to stick to the lower volume kind of template, which I do have people that do that, and I do have people that just genuinely enjoy doing that and will use it, but probably start somewhere in that mid-range and kind of adjust up and down as needed. And obviously, like, intensity is going to play a big factor in the recovery there. You know, if we're doing 15 sets a week on a body part at an RPE of 10, well, I mean, that's going to be hugely, that's going to be a ton of fatigue compared to doing all of those at submaximal, submaximal intensity. So, I mean, all that needs to be considered, but that's kind of gives you a rough range, and then I can adjust up and down. Let's see. And like I said, I might prioritize a little more volume, put and utilize a little more of their recovery resources, I guess you could say, on the weaker muscle groups. Next one, can low SHBG lead to insulin resistance, long-term or short-term? Okay, so SHBG being sex hormone binding globulin, it's a protein, binding protein. You would typically find SHBG like higher in somebody that has low free testosterone, so you know it's binding to the testosterone. So off the top of my head, and I might have to research this more, but off the top of my head, I can think of I don't know that I can think of any studies necessarily that looked at that direct link between the two, but I do remember some correlation studies, or at least one correlation study that showed low SHBG actually was correlated with insulin resistance in certain populations. And I want to say it was more prevalent in like females and older females. So maybe like, you know, post-menopausal type of situation where hormone profile is a little bit different. But that was just a correlation study. So, I mean, you can take that for what it's worth. Have I seen it in real life? Not really. I can't think of an instance where I looked at the two and saw an obvious connection between the two in lab work. Might be an interesting experiment to kind of see, but again, if I remember correctly, I don't think that there were any studies that said that directly, looked at the two or a mechanism between the two. But there could, it sounds like from what I remember, there could certainly be a correlation there. So that's not to say that correlation is meaningless. I mean, it can certainly mean something. So yeah, that is something I would have to refresh on a little bit, but that's what I can recall. All right. Next one, when calculating insulin dose, humulin R specifically, relative to carb intake, what is the correct way to assess postprandial glucose levels? When to take the reading? What is considered the optimal range? Well, you could anywhere in like the 2 to 3 hour range. I mean, if the meal's really big, you might not baseline within 2 hours, but you could use like 2.5, 3 hours. So essentially, I mean, if you're going to eat another meal in 3 hours, just test it before you eat the next meal. You could say in 2.5, 3 hours, your postprandial should be pretty much at baseline at that point. And you're going to know. And postprandial glucose is going to be, in most people with healthy liver function, healthy pancreatic function, is going to be pretty similar to, this can be pretty similar to your fasting. It's not going to be a whole lot different, maybe a little bit, depending on a couple factors, like your sleep-wake response and things like that. But yeah, right around that 2.5, 3 hour range should be plenty of time. And I mean, optimal, everyone's going to vary a little bit. I like to try to keep people under 90 if I can. I don't freak out too much if we go over 90. It's just I don't like to stay there too long. I mean, if we're deep off season, we got a little bit of body fat, we've been pushing food super hard and they're floating over 90, it's usually not a big deal. I mean, they're not going to be there, too terribly long. And, we're going to have to peel some layers back and go back into a mini cut or sensitizing phase eventually anyhow. So as long as they're not floating around, way over 100, I don't want them floating at like 110, 120 for months on end, something like that. But if we're a little over that 90 range, briefly, it's not something I worry about too much. But ideally, I'd like to stay in the probably 75 to 90 range, and everyone's going to be a little bit different. Everyone's going to feel a little bit different and function a little bit differently within that range. So you don't necessarily have to keep someone at 70 all the time. That's not necessarily optimal for the person. And people, just like people feel hypo at different ranges. I feel hypo. If I drop below 60 into the 50s, I feel it. I'm sweating. I could definitely feel it. I'm getting very faint tunnel vision. And I have other people that drop into like the 30s or 20s before they even feel anything. So it's definitely person dependent. And then of course you can adjust. Looking at that would allow you to adjust your dose up or down to baseline, or to get your postprandial where you want it. And you can make small adjustments. You can go up and down 1 IU type of thing at a time and kind of figure out what you want. Now, just keep in mind, too, that there are other factors that cause blood glucose to vary. So you need to look at it as a trend. Like you will, if you're very stressed one day or you have a crazy, hard, stressful workout, your BG may go higher just from the stress, just from adrenaline, cortisol, and things rising, and you're dumping more glucose. So, don't freak out if one day it's higher than another day. That might not really paint the whole picture. So definitely look at it as a trend and an average. Okay. We have one more. So, all right, good question here. So the next one is, most people know how compromised the body is during prep. What biofeedback or indicators are you looking for in order to gauge appropriate load during a fat loss phase or contest prep? There's a fine line between strength progress and injury as the body gets depleted. Do you have any rules of thumb to follow or look at in order to optimize safety while trying to make progress? Okay, well, in general, there's going to be a point where you get far enough away from your natural body fat set point. Your calories are low and all that stuff in prep. People know how it goes. Is it really worth going to, really worth putting yourself in danger of injuries to try to progress load or even maintain load? No. It's grossly overstated how people think your muscle tissue is just going to fall off you. If someone's 2 weeks out and they're feeling weak and they need to reduce the load, I go for it. That muscle's not going anywhere. It's not. You'll hit that wall eventually. I notice most people, maybe their energy outside the gym starts to go down, and then next step they notice is their in-gym energy starts to go down, and that's where you have to start, keeping an eye on things. But it's a lot of the time, you'll start losing a rep here and there because your endurance goes down. You have less glycogen. ATP production may not be as good. So, you're just kind of you peter out on sets a little bit quicker than you normally would. And that's okay. You can still maintain load okay at that point, but you do get to the point where you just unrack a weight and it just feels ungodly heavy, and you just need to be careful at that point. I've had points where I try to maintain load and I'm pass out under the bar because I'm by myself, in the gym or whatever, just because it's I'm so weak and frail. You will get some people that definitely get like that. It's just use your best judgment. If the weight feels twice as heavy, you need to reduce load. The muscle's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to lose the muscle and if you are having to reduce the amount, or reduce your load drastically 8 or 10 weeks out from a show, then you have another issue. That's not, you shouldn't be at that point anyhow. But if you're within that 4 week out range, I would even go as far as say 4 weeks out and you're really, really, really feeling it and you have to, I might even go as far as to change someone's training style at that point, or their template for the last 4 weeks if we need to. Do more metabolic work, do things that you're still breaking down, stimulating tissue, feeding it, it's not going to go anywhere. So, that's what I would look for. I just listen to feedback from clients and kind of take it as we go. Hope that helps. Well, that's it for today.